Okay, I'm going to start off by reading the poem by someone else. In the Nation magazine, which is a liberal magazine published in the United States, there's a poet named Calvin Trillin, who's also has many other things done, but he has a very short poem, "The Transformation of Afghanistan." Fanatics terrorized the Afghan people. For 20 years, we fought there in a war. So what is it going to be like when we're finished? Well, pretty much like what it was before. So that's that. Then there are two recent publications from Scars magazine, from Scars Publications, one from Down in the Dirt is there much, and Brian has a poem in the other one, CC&D. Mildred, a rather plain-looking woman with passionate desires, gathered up her courage, put on a fashionable yet rather revealing dress, and went off to a local dance. After an uneventful and unproductive evening, she got up to leave, stopped by this champagne-laden punch. As she drank 2 glasses down, she murmured dejectedly, "I don't give a fuck." A tall, attractive man on the other side of the table replied, "Well, I do." They left the dance together. And then from their other publication choices, I believe that's the one. Yes, Brian has 2 poems in it. Then I follow him, Bukowski and Me. I've told this many times before, but we'll do it again. I just tell stories and call it poetry. I never liked poetry, although I studied it as an English literature major in college. I never saw the point. I was a published writer, a reporter, a columnist, a reviewer, and author of books, over 2,500 pieces, but not a poet. Not a writer of poetry or even a reader of poetry for 25 years. Since then, thousands of poems written, hundreds of them published in magazines, 10 books and chapbooks published, bookcases full of poetry books. What changed all of this in my life? I was coming out of a restroom in a Barnes & Noble and walking down the aisle when I saw a book with a very strange title. I picked it up and took it back to my table. It was a book of poetry by Charles Bukowski. I read it anyhow. I was doomed. I recognized immediately that Bukowski was an alcoholic, a misogynist, more than a bit of a nut, fucking brilliant. And he made me want to try my hand. So I did. If you just like my writing, blame Bukowski. He was poetry too. If you like it, then say a prayer for his eternal soul. You might consider mine as well. So that's in the latest CC&D anthology. Do I have any time left, David?
Totally, you've got the brevity going there. Rock on.
This is from from New and Collected Poems that was published between 2010 and 2017. It's being reprinted as the new edition. The Fork in the Road. The great philosopher L.P. Barra, known to his friends and fans as Yogi, had many memorable expressions. "No one goes there anymore, it's too crowded. It gets late early out there," referring to the late field shadows in Yankee Stadium. "It ain't over till it's over," and many more. My favorite of all is, "When you come to the fork in the road, take it." To me, this bit of wisdom has always meant, when faced with a decision, make it. Sometimes the forks aren't clearly mine, and I've been very lucky. In the past, I've chosen to wander down. I promised a friend that I would drive him to school on a Saturday morning to take the federal service test, the test in which I had no interest. The choice eventually led me into the 50-year career with computers, something I knew nothing about at the time and had zero interest in. Years later, I made the presentation to a potential client, and when we didn't make a sale, I became very impressed with the female member of the evaluation team. A few years later, I received a call from a client asking if I knew the same woman who was now applying for a job at the firm. I strongly recommended it. She got the job, and coincidentally, I joined the same firm shortly thereafter. that was 45 years ago. We've been married for 43 since. And you come to the fork in the road, take it. And one more about physical things, stress by a stress test. You should really take a stress test. I went to my internist's office to take my semi-annual physical. And when he told me of when I told him of tightness in my chest, he asked, "When was your last stress test?" I paused for effect as in deep thought and said, never. He decided that although the tightness was due to my asthma, that I should have one. Since it's his job to keep me alive, I agreed. But hell, everyone has one. They can't be too bad. When the hospital called to confirm the appointment, I had second thoughts. The fast for midnight was doable, but the no coffee for 24 hours was almost a deal breaker. But I pressed on and arrived at the hospital, caffeine deprived, to be stress tested. The first thing I did was explain the procedure so I'd be calm, knowing what to expect. They would inject with the fluid for about 45 minutes. Then they would take pictures for 40. I would then go on a treadmill for a while and then take some pictures and I'd be headed home. Sounds like a piece of cake. Were it that would actually were. The needle they used to inject me with the radioactive that I mentioned, not fluid, had a point the size of a bayonet. The taking pictures was not a standard X-ray. It was lying flat and still on a table with Edison, with everything but my chin under the machine. Claustrophobic, boring, frustrating. The 40 minutes seemed like 3 hours. Then off to the treadmill, where a very nice young woman turned into an S&M dominatrix. Setting the machine faster and faster at a greater angle. We have to get your heart rate to 129. It turned out it was a race between my heart rate and asthma, and a heart rate barely squeaked by. Then back to the infernal machine to take more pictures. Another 40-minute, 3-hour experience. And finally it was over. Send me home. So you should really take a stress test. Misery loves company. Thank you for listening to my prattle.